Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and a good evening to all. I hope you have had your lunch, that we are continuing Rejuvenate edition 4 with a very special guest today. His name is Philip Liu Chun Foong, who is a sports psychology officer with the National Sports Institute, or how we call it here in Malaysia, ISN, Institute Sukan Negara. And if you notice on the logo, there is a number 10 there. ISN is actually celebrating their 10th anniversary this year. Correct, Philip?
Correct.
Right. Welcome to the show, Philip.
Hello. Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone. Hope that you would have a fun journey today, and hopefully I can share some of our work working with the elite athletes and high performance athletes in Malaysia.
So very quickly, before we obviously get Philip to introduce himself a little bit more, he's given you a little bit of a peek in terms of what he does as well. But on his LinkedIn profile, it says here that he is a sports psychology officer, obviously, and he's also the Institute Sukan Negara, or the National Sports Institute team leader of sailing's Road to Tokyo Olympic program. So we will ask him to also define a little bit in terms of what that means. It also says here that he's a licensed level 1 football coach with the English FA, Football Association. So that's very interesting to also note, Philip, and we will also touch base a little bit on all of that in a short while. But Philip, I suppose let's start with your education. What did you study that, have you ended up in ISN for that matter?
Sure. So thank you, Andrew. So I'll just explain briefly about how my journey is, especially my education journey. So I started my education in Malaysia, which is in Tunku Abdul Rahman College. I think now it's called Tunku Abdul Rahman College University. So I studied counseling and I studied psychology there. After that, I continued my master's in MSc in sports psychology in Leopold John Moores University, United Kingdom. That is when I did my coaching license for football in the UK. So I got my coaching license from the UK. After my graduation from MSc in sports psychology from Leopold John Moores, I came back to ISN in 2000, and I started working there in 2015 until now. So I'm currently in my 6th year, moving my 7th year. So a lot of my work is on providing sports psychology services to the national athletes that we are assigned to. So in an easier way is that each officer in the National Sports Institute is assigned to particular sports or particular few sports. So let's say I'm currently taking care of the sports such as like long bowls, sailing, and football. So these are the sports that's under my care. So I'm the sports psychology officer, responsibility for taking care of them. So as what you mentioned earlier about the team leader for the sailing program. So each of the sports have their own, we call it a sport science team leader. So you are in charge about like how you're going to identify the support that will be given to that particular sports. So let's say I'm the sports science team leader for sailing. You identify like who will be their gym instructor, what are services of nutrition, psychology, or even biomechanics that will be provided to that particular sports. So sailing is part of the Olympic sports. For that particular sports, we identify on specifically for the athletes that qualify for the Olympics, what